Welcome back to Service to School Stories. I'm your host, Sydney Mathis, Director of Student Success here at Service to School. As a former college admissions officer and the spouse of an active duty service member, I'm excited to dig into topics within the higher education landscape as it relates to veterans and transitioning service members. Let's dig in. Everyone, today I'm joined by Jeff Miller. Jeff is the COO and Director of GMAT and GRE instruction at Target Test Prep. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us today. I gave a little bit of an introduction there, but I want to hear from you how you ended up at Target Test Prep, and essentially, why are we looking to you to kind of be the expert in this space? So Jeff, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, Sydney. And I'm happy to provide some insight into myself and how I landed there. So many moons ago, I actually was a GMAT student myself. Soon after graduating college, a couple years after, call it 14, 15 years ago. And I met our founder and CEO, Scott Woodbury Stewart, when I myself was a student. Now, back in, say, 06, 07, there wasn't a ton of great options for GMAT. And that's kind of how I got to know him, because he actually helped me. And soon after working with him, I got to know him pretty well and knew the future, which was creating a GMAT prep course that was more complete, that didn't involve necessarily having to go to some physical location and sit down for a class. I mean, essentially a self-study course that everybody could use. And I really appreciated his vision, given that I was a student myself.
Yeah.
So, around that time, around 13 years ago, is when, we started cranking out Target Test Prep, the course. It took us a number of years. Obviously, it eventually got done. We've grown and we've grown. And so since then, we've had tons of great success and worked with, thousands and thousands of students at so many countries all over the world. And, my role has not only been helping create the math portion of our course, of the GMAT and GRE courses, but, I've also done private tutoring and interacted with and worked with myself thousands and thousands of students. And, essentially have seen students from all areas of life and have been able to provide advice to them and help them not only achieve their GMAT, but, advice beyond that, for business school and things like that. So, basically for the last 13 years, GMAT and GRE has pretty much been my thing. So I think I know a lot about those exams, basically.
For sure. That's the world that you've been living in for the last, 13 years. So one thing I do want to say is, I know you've worked with some of our applicants here at Service to School, and applicants who sign up for the MBA team, they do have to have a GRE or GMAT score on file with us. So just thank you even for, providing the discount codes and being willing to support our student population as they do pursue either MBA programs or higher level graduate programs. So just a thanks for the team here at Service to School, the support that you all continue to provide for service members. So it's a great resource.
Yeah, well, thank you. We're looking forward to doing even more stuff with you guys in the future.
All right, so let's just dig in. I took the GMAT kind of like you many moons ago when I was applying to graduate programs, and I was deciding my program accepted the GMAT or the GRE. So just fresh out of the gate, where do you see most students signing up for support? Do you see it's kind of like evenly split? And then your personal preference, like which exam do you feel is a better fit for certain students?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question, and it's a question we get a lot, to be honest. From our perspective, we see students from both sides of the GMAT and the GRE. I wouldn't say one is necessarily bigger or more prominent than the other. Um, I think, well, first of all, there's some programs that only allow one of those tests. So that's going to make the decision for you. But
Sure.
where we find students at a crossroads is usually in regards to an MBA. And if this was a conversation we were having 7 or 8 years ago, I'd probably say, you know what? It's probably safer to take the GMAT. Students are just starting to incorporate the GRE. Some schools prefer the GMAT over the GRE, others don't. So there'd be more research involved to make sure that you're making the right decision.
Hmm.
These days, it's pretty split. So what I find myself telling students is take the exam where you're going to excel the most, and that's it. Um, Now, to determine that, a lot of times what it takes is a little bit of research of either exam. So
Hmm.
let's say a week of getting the content and structure formulated, getting just a decent base, and then taking an official practice exam. So for GMAT, going to MBA.com, for GRE, going to ETS.org, taking the first of their free exams, seeing how you do, and then also take a bird's eye view and say, well, is there one exam that I feel better about
Yeah.
versus the other? And that would be the path to take. Now, if you're overly concerned, even despite me saying that schools generally will accept either exam, well, the move is simple. Reach out to admissions,
Yeah.
contact someone there, and just, dot your I's and cross your T's. And assuming that either exam is accepted, then you make your decision based on where you think you'll excel.
Sure. And Jeff, let me ask a follow-up question to that. So my world is mostly on the SAT and the ACT side, and I know kind of the same answer, colleges will accept both and, kind of depends on which one you feel like is a better fit test for you. Is there anything like a concordance chart where someone could say, "Hey, I took both, you know, but based on, this chart, it shows that I did better or I would perform better," or if I sent both scores to an admissions office, like how those exams kind of correlate?
Yeah, well, there is a conversion chart that ETS, the makers of the GRE, have made, but I'd say it's slightly outdated. And the thing is now because GRE is now widely accepted, schools are generally publishing the GRE scores, whereas years ago they weren't.
Yeah.
So you can basically just go on to any website of any school and get that information. And again, if it's not there, the path is simple. Reach out to admissions. I mean, I say that all the time because there's no better place than to hear it from the horse's mouth. Like,
Absolutely.
if you're unsure, call someone. If they don't have the scores published or won't give them to you, then maybe they won't. And then that's a different situation. But always reach out to them to make sure you have all the information you need because it's going to be a journey regardless of the test you study for. So you just don't want to be misinformed on the front end and then lose a ton of time and then have to go back and restudy.
Sure. Sure. That's really helpful information because I think a lot of times, you hear maybe your buddy's taking one exam over the other, or, one college or one school you're applying to is taking, the GMAT versus the GRE. So having kind of that nuanced background or back knowledge is, I think, really helpful.
Yeah, totally agree.
And then as far as kind of studying for either exam, what would you say are your top three tips for someone who's even, like starting to approach um, planning for an MBA program?
Okay, well, this is a very good question. So I will say that also is a commonly asked question because if you think about it, a lot of students who begin studying for either the GMAT and GRE are generally some years out of college.
Hmm.
I mean, some take it who are in college, so they're kind of in study mode and can more easily craft a study plan, but many are not. So you're kind of coming at it from a place of, oh, wow, I haven't really had to study for something like this in a long time. So just understanding how to craft a study plan is an effort in itself. So, one of the main tips I would say is make sure that you're following and creating a study plan that's very linear and structured and topical. Now, that may seem obvious, but you would be so shocked how many students just crack open a book and just try to, you know, go through questions, question
Yeah,
after
just trying
question. Yeah, and
osmosis into their brain.
yeah, exactly right. So they're like, well, it can't hurt me that much if I do a couple geometry questions here and, go over those solutions and then a few ratio questions here. Eventually it's all going to stick, and it usually doesn't for most students. So a huge tip is learn a topic through and through, practice just that topic, develop your mastery, see where you're weak, fill in knowledge gaps based on that practice, and then rinse and repeat with the next verbal or quant topic.
Hmm.
And by doing that, you're going to feel organized in your studying. And just the macro idea of having a study plan is going to make you feel better. You're not going to be anxious about studying, because that's another thing. If you sit down to study and you have to spend 15 to 20 minutes deciding what to do, like
Yeah, that's
that's it.
wasted time.
Yeah, it's incredibly anxiety inducing. So, you know, having a study plan in place, a good one, it's just going to make the whole process smoother for you. And, you'll see where you're at and where you need to finish. So you always know how much time you have in between.
Hmm.
So that would be one big tip. Um, Another tip is give yourself plenty of time to study. Um, if you want some sort of indication of how long it might take, figure out your target score, take a practice exam to get a baseline score, and then you'll have a loose idea. But don't, decide in August that you want to apply, or July, first round admissions, and you need a 730. It very likely isn't going to work out.
Right.
Um, So prepare for and plan for taking this test really as early as possible. I mean, your score lasts for 5 years, and there are some lucky people who are like, okay, I know I want to go to business school in 2 years. So I have the time, energy, focus, motivation to do it now. And they do it. And that's amazing. I mean, I can't tell you how many students I've spoken with where I'm like, look, time is on your side. Your future self will thank you. The younger you are, in general, the less responsibilities you have,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Chances are you don't have children, or maybe you're not even married yet, and it just works better. You have more flexibility with your schedule. So if you can do that, great. If you can't, that's okay too. But at least plan out 6+ months that you may need to study. You might have to take the test multiple times. Just don't put your back up against the wall so that you're rushing your application, you're rushing your GMAT. It's just allow time for everything to breathe. And I think the whole process will be so much better.
Hmm. Is there ever a situation where someone's preparing too far in advance? I mean, I know you mentioned the scores are good for 5 years, but do you feel like there's kind of like a sweet spot that they could land in?
Well, I've heard people from time to time, like, in forums, sometimes asking questions. And they're like, well, I want to take the GMAT in 2 years. So what can I do now to kind of like
Yeah.
prepare for it? And there's not, I usually don't recommend that. Like, yeah, I guess you could do like quant drills or read, the New York Times or Wall Street Journal to get used to like, reading comprehension or something like that. But in general, when you're ready to study, you want to dive in feet first. So I don't find that dipping your toes in is quite necessary.
Hmm.
And also, I would never say to kind of put uh, a ceiling on your prep. Like, I wouldn't tell someone to purposely for 2 years. I guess that's kind of my
Hmm.
point.
Yeah.
Um, I think most people are pretty successful in like a 4 to 6 month timeline, but don't purposely drag it out.
Yeah.
Like I usually say, hey, study for around 18 hours a week. And if you can do that, I think that's a very good sweet spot. But if you're coming and saying, well, I'm just going to do 5 hours a week and study for 2 years, like, yeah, I wouldn't recommend that. So, Yeah, I'd say anywhere in the 4 to 6 to even 8-month timeline, depending on your starting score, is a good sweet spot. Now, take that with a grain of salt. If you're scoring a 700 on your first practice exam and need a 730, you're going to be able to do that quicker. So
Mhm.
that's why I always recommend researching the schools you want to go to so you can get a target score. Take the initial practice exam to get a baseline score, and then you'll have a
Yeah.
little bit of an idea.
Yeah, I imagine having that baseline kind of is the first step to figuring out, how much test prep do I actually need? Do I need to, like really hit the ground, or can you kind of space it out a little bit longer? What would you say, like, I don't want to say like is the shortest amount of time someone should prep, but is there anywhere where you're kind of like, hey, this just doesn't make sense? I mean, obviously r- cutting it too close doesn't make sense, but do you ever have anyone who signs up and they're like, oh, I'm applying for round one, and you're like, it's just not going to work here?
Yeah, unfortunately, we do.
That ship has sailed.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and the thing with us and me specifically too is like we like to be very honest because
Hmm.
these are really big life decisions you're making. So if someone comes to us and they're like, "Yeah, I have a 400 on the GMAT and I want a 730 and I'm applying in a month and I need to be done in a month and a half," or someone says, "I have a 280 on the GRE and I want a 325 in a month and a half," like we're going to be pretty honest with them and be like, "Well, you either need to think about either the next round or perhaps even the next admission cycle
Hmm.
because this is not going to be an overnight thing." And the scary thing is when people don't get that advice, what they
Yeah.
do is they do stuff that's actually detrimental to their learning and their studying. So not only are they not done in a month and a half, but then they kind of have to circle back and start from scratch so that they can do it the right way. I mean, it's like if you have a leaky boat, right? The
Yeah.
quicker fix is probably going to lead to more holes, and then you're just going to have to go back and fix it anyway.
Yep. Yeah. Those
um,
band-aid
yeah,
solutions.
exactly. So it's kind of like that.
Yeah. How many times do you see people take either the GRE or the GMAT?
Um, that's a good question. I would say more. Well, I wouldn't say more often than not, but for sure we see people taking it multiple times, which is totally fine. Um, you have really great flexibility on what scores you're sending to schools, either with the GMAT or the GRE. With the GMAT, it's kind of cool because you can cancel a score and then reinstate it, and your
Mm,
canceled scores are not sent to schools. And as long as you reinstate it, within that 5 years. So
yeah.
yeah, if you're unhappy with the GMAT score, you can get rid of it, retake it, and then just send the score that you're happy with if you want to. So I do see because of that flexibility, I think people take it multiple times. And there's a level of anxiety and nerves that creep up on any of these tests. So it's not crazy to think that the first time someone takes their real GMAT or real GRE, that things can happen mentally
Yeah.
that affect how they do. So I think, a lot of times that's why we see people taking it multiple times. And again, that's totally fine. And it shouldn't be a source of frustration if in your first attempt or even your second attempt, you don't hit your score goal. You just have to stay positive and stay motivated and understand that it's a process. And, don't compare yourself to others, of course. Like, your journey for this exam is your personal journey. So, look, if it takes you 3 times, by the time you graduate business school, I don't think you're going to be thinking about, oh, well, this is great. I graduated from HBS, but I took the GMAT 3 times. Like,
Yeah.
I doubt
Yeah.
that's happening.
Right, right. Yeah, it's just interesting because I know, again, going back to the SAT or the ACT, usually when students were like, "Oh, this is my 3rd or 4th time," it's like, "Okay, but what are we doing different here now for test 3 or 4? How are we studying differently? How are you approaching the exam differently?" We don't wanna just keep swinging for the fences and we're not, spending any extra time in the batting cages. Um,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
sounds like that same advice kind of applies here as well.
Yes, 100%.
Well, um, and I don't know if you can speak to this part of the GMAT or the GRE, but how important do you think that score is on a student's either application file or success in the admissions process?
That's always an interesting question. I mean, a lot of times what you'll hear from admissions is, we take a holistic view at you as an applicant. It's not just one-sided with scores. So, can we say accurately that there are students who get into various business schools and graduate schools with scores that are under the average or median? The answer is yes, right? We can 100% say that because we see it in the data. But it takes a pretty special applicant for that to happen. And
Hmm.
you're 1,000% certain that you're that special applicant,
Yeah.
I would never say like go for a score that's under the average. The safest move is always to hit the averages as your target score or
Hmm.
higher. Um, because that way the GMAT or GRE score will check the box and then they'll look at you as the rest of your app. You won't not get in because of your GMAT score or GRE
Right.
score. So that's always a safe thing. Now, if you're someone who just can't hit those averages for whatever reason, then yeah, you're going to have to, do some research, maybe speak to admissions, maybe speak to a consultant, speak to alumni, like figure out if you as an applicant, despite having that lower score, can work at a particular school.
Hmm.
And if it turns out that it can, then great. If it turns out that it can't, then yeah, you may have to either rethink where you're applying or spend some more time on your GMAT or GRE to make sure that you're hitting or beating those averages.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think, the term holistic review is it feels like a buzzword. It's like, checking that wild bingo box because we say it a lot on the undergraduate side. And when I worked in law school admissions, it's kind of the same thing. But, it's people always come back to, well, what else are they looking at? Right. And it's like, well, they're truly looking at everything, like you just said. Um, so I think that's just a really important piece for people to remember as they are prepping for grad programs or if you're actively applying that, like you said, there's not necessarily going to be one piece of your application file that is the end all be all, is the nail in the coffin. Usually it's a number of things when they're trying to decide if you are a good fit for their program. Because it's so easy to get hung up on the numbers and feeling that like that's the part of your application process that you can control, right? If I just study harder, if I just did another practice test. Um, but I think, getting to a place where you're comfortable and you're happy with your scores and what that means for your application file.
Yeah, I agree. It's always a fine line, right? Like
Hmm.
sometimes people will stop short because of, oh, well, they're going to take a holistic view, even if they could do better. And so in that case, it's like, well, maybe you should do better just to be more certain, right? And
Hmm.
then others feel like they've kind of maxed out. And so in that case, maybe you do see if they're going to take that holistic view of your personal application. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. But yeah, the general rule of thumb is if you can hit the averages or beat it, that's one less thing to worry about when you're going through the process.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. Turning tables a slightly bit, um, I want to talk a little bit more about preparing for either one of the exams. So you all have different prep options for applicants that are interested in signing up. Can you talk to me a little bit about your philosophy or the target test prep model as far as what is it like for a student to work with you all?
Yeah, so as I told you, we spent many years working on our self-study course because we wanted our online self-study course because we really wanted something thorough and complete for students that wasn't super expensive and that they could use on their own. We do offer private tutoring and some students take advantage of that. But for those that don't, we want them to be able to through a course that has everything they need from A to Z and is mapped out and laid out exactly how they want it. And going back to what I mentioned about, kind of topical studying, that's really how we have the TTP program laid out. So students will learn one topic at a time, whether it be math or verbal, and they'll go through an entire chapter that has real live examples in the chapter and great content. And then they'll practice immediately after the chapter 100 plus questions broken down into easy, medium, hard on that topic. When they assure that they understand most of it by doing those practice questions and, seeing that they're understanding the things they've read, they'll move on to the next quant or verbal topic.
Hmm.
And that level of organization, I think, is key because mentally, if you can kind of check the box and say, okay, I understand linear and quadratic equations, so now I'm ready to move to, say, subject verb agreement and sentence correction, or number properties in quant. All of this is in a student study plan, which actually is conformed to what their actual score goal is. So
Oh.
yeah, we did this really cool thing where we said, okay, we know our course is really detailed for someone who wants, say, a 730 or higher GMAT score or a 330 or higher GRE score. So as students input scores that are lower, say a 320, 300 for GRE or 680, 700 for GMAT, the course is scaled back and there's less content for them to cover. So it kind of conforms to the score that they want to hit.
Hmm. That's
That's
cool.
nice too. Yeah, exactly. Because we don't want students to learn more than they necessarily need. So it allows them to, more efficiently get to where they're going, all the while still following that study plan that they need to do from beginning to end.
Hmm. And is there, I know you mentioned before, kind of like a window as far as how long someone should be studying. Say I were to sign up for some TTP prep today and I was doing the self-studying program. What does that timeline build out look like?
Well, I would say similar to what I said actually. So when I was saying a 4 to 6 month horizon, um, that's generally a good amount of time for students to work through our course. But then, you got to remember, like, there's students who come to us who have already done prep, who've already taken the GMAT. I mean, let's
Mhm.
say someone's at a 660 for GMAT and they want a 720, or someone's at a 325 for GRE and wants a 332.
Right.
Well, we'll have to do every kind of nook and cranny in our course? Well, probably not, right? If someone is reading a lesson about adding fractions and they've clearly learned that, or about even and odd numbers and they've clearly learned that, they're probably just going to skim it and move on. And to me, that's the really cool part of the fact that our course is written. Now, we
Mhm.
have video solutions in the course to a lot of our chapter problems, but the learning portion is written, and so it does provide students with full flexibility to deeply engage where they need to and skim where they need to. So for someone who already has a decent amount of foundation, they can pick and choose what they do thoroughly and what they don't, allowing them to efficiently move through the course.
Yeah. Which is great for people who, like you said, if you don't have a lot of outside responsibilities, you could move through the course at a different pace as opposed to myself, 2 kids, working full time, right? Like how I
Yeah.
move through the course might look a little bit different from someone else, but you can kind of cater that to what your needs are. Is that what it sounds like?
Yeah, exactly. But then, and then there's always that brick wall moment though, where someone's like, well, I need to go from a 550 to a 740. It doesn't look like I'm going to be able to do that with your course in 2 months. And it's always a funny conversation because I'm like, this isn't necessarily a target test prep issue. This is kind of a, for lack of a better term, a you issue, right?
Mhm.
Because anywhere you go to try to get from a I think I said a 550 to a 740 in 2 months is probably not going to work.
Hmm.
So you have to kind of retrain your thinking and say, well, oh yeah, that makes more sense. Like I could use any number of courses and I'm probably not going to be at my goal in 2 months. So it's kind of like we're just providing a more honest assessment of what you need
Sure.
um, for you to hit your goal and do it the right way the first time. But yes, for others who have a decent foundation already and different things going on and more or less time that they can commit to studying can do things faster than, as you said, someone like yourself, 2 kids, full-time job. I mean, yeah, you're probably doing a lot of studying post bedtime if your life is similar to mine with my 2 children.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, it would sound like late night studying. And, for me, I was, I was not married. I did not have children when I was going through my own GMAT stuff. So yeah, I had the pick of the litter of whenever I wanted to study and sit down and do any of that.
for sure. What are some, I would say, like the biggest myths or misconceptions that you hear from prospective applicants who are looking for some test prep?
Um, I would say the overnight success is a really big one um, because I think they'll hear a couple stories from, say, coworkers or friends or relatives, and they're like, oh, well, you know, person X was able to do this in 2 months, which is, doing a bunch of practice questions. So why can't I? And I think people need to understand that it's a unique journey for everybody. And you just need to look at what's happening with you personally um, and not what everybody else did. Because, yes, there are people who can do great things in a short amount of time, but that's not the majority of the population, right? Like most
Right.
people have to really work at this and make sure that they make it a top priority over a good amount of time. And so it might take longer than that cool story you hear about someone in 3 weeks going from a 600 to a 750. So I think that's one of the biggest things because we like to follow the lead of someone who did something that we think is ideal. Because, of course, like no one wants to spend 6 months studying for the GMAT. They want to be the guy who studied or girl 3 weeks. But you
Right.
got to be careful in thinking that way because you're really going to be setting yourself up for disappointment if you do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that goes back to kind of what we were talking about before, where it's like, this is, your test prep journey. And just because someone else was able to, either self study or they took a test prep course and it worked really well for them, that might not be the case for your specific situation. And I think that's just so important to remember as, students, applicants are working throughout any application process and preparing for any um, big transition in their life, that this is central to your experience and that it's going to be different for everyone. There's no right or wrong way to go about, test prep or these program applications. You got to figure out what works for you.
Yeah, exactly. And it goes beyond that too. Like people, one of the big things is like, hey, can I game the GMAT, for
Okay.
example? I mean, you can, if you go to any forum, you'll see certain people, talking about, well, if I just do really, really well in the first 10 questions, then I'm pretty much set. My score is locked in, right?
Yep.
And let's say someone did do that and they did really well in the first 10 questions, but let's then say that same student also did really well on every question that followed the first 10 questions because that person is just a really great GMAT test taker. Well, if you're someone who's just okay and you try that, and then you get clobbered on the rest of the exam and have to guess on the last 12 questions, and you end up getting a really bad score, you'll see that that didn't actually work for you. So you have to take some of these things with a grain of salt and recognize who's telling you what, and also understand that this test can't be realistic as saying, well, just do well in the first 10 questions and, everything else is gravy. Like it can't be that simple. And if it ever was, my guess is GMAC for example, would say, you know what, it looks like people have figured
This
this
out. Yeah.
out. Yeah, maybe we need to adjust our algorithm because they're not in a cave. Like if people are talking about this stuff on the forums, like they're eventually going to encounter it and say, okay, we
Yeah,
need to make some fixes. So yeah, I'd say be careful about that too. In addition to the other things I mentioned.
for sure. Jeff, as we get ready to wrap up, especially for people who are actively considering applying to MBA programs, what do you want them to take away from this conversation?
Well, I think understanding that the GMAT or the GRE, both of these are really serious exams. They're not what you encountered in high school or college, or heck, even some of your financial exams like the Series 7 or Series 63 exams that I actually took prior to dealing with the GMAT. And understanding that it's going to take a very serious commitment for most students to excel at these exams, and just be prepared to carve out a nice portion of your life to studying for either the GMAT or GRE, with the understanding that it's finite and it will end at some point. And in the interim, yeah, you'll have to give up some things that you otherwise would probably rather be doing. And if these scores are game changers for you and your career, then these are things that are worth giving up temporarily to lock in the score you need to hopefully ensure the best possible acceptance, which of course hopefully leads to the best possible job. So,
Sure.
these are the things to keep in the back of your mind so you can remain motivated and disciplined to really do the best you can on either the GMAT or the GRE.
Yeah. As I was prepping for the podcast, I was just reading, digging into some of the test score data and, the historical um, job placement that's correlated with a certain score on an exam. And I imagine that falls in line with, a higher score is going to get you into a top tier school, which is going to produce higher earning potential. But it's just interesting when you say this is finite and it will be over, but just giving it all that you have and can give it at that time is going to pay off dividends in the long run. And when you're, out on the market making all that money, you're not going to look back and be like, oh, it was so tough studying for my GRE at the time, right? You're just going to look at where you're at now. So just I encourage students all the time, like power through right now. It's kind of like, your wheels are in the mud and you just got to keep pedaling, but once you're out on the other side, it's gonna be behind you and, you're not even gonna look in the rearview mirror. So I think that's a really great point that you made.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you have to miss a brunch here or there, or a fun day out or a weekend road trip, it's fine. I mean, at the moment, you may be like, "Geez, I really wish I could do those things," but
Mhm.
eventually, in retrospect, you'll be like, "Oh yeah, getting a studying for the GMAT or GRE, that was probably a
That was
smarter
worth
decision."
it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
absolutely. Those adult decisions that none of us wanna actually make.
Exactly, exactly.
Cool. Well, Jeff, I truly appreciate your time. I know we have information about Target Test Prep on our Service to School website, but also our ambassador channel. So, for any of our applicants that are listening and are looking to add some test prep to their either weekends or their next few months, absolutely reach out to us here at Service to School. We're more than happy to put you in touch with Jeff and his team so we can get you all set up for success. As I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, to be paired with an ambassador on the MBA team, we do ask that you have test scores on file with us. But I know Jeff and his team are an incredible resource and they're here to support you all throughout the process.
Yeah, definitely.
And yeah, we will definitely get some more resources and some more webinars up together to continue the conversation about how we can best support our student population.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, and for sure, we're looking forward to more offerings with service to school and discounts related to our courses. And of course, I'm thrilled to do more podcasts and webinars with you and your team, and just provide as much possible guidance as I can for people.
That's it for this episode. Join us next week, same time, same place, where we share more Service to School stories. Service to School Stories is hosted by Sydney Mathis, the Director of Student Success, and produced by Amanda Tobias, the Director of Communication at Service to School. Service to School is a 501c3 nonprofit providing free college admission support to transitioning service members and veterans. Join us next time and follow us for more on all of your favorite social media platforms.